It's the new adventures of Indiana Jim, Episode 2, for July 27th, 2025.
Coming to you not exactly live from
The cliffs of insanity!
It Must Be Indiana Jim.
That's right, we are right into it. No muss, no fluff, no extra intro babble at the beginning. We are direct and to the point with the theme music. We are ready to go. And I have a few things to get out of the way from the previous episode. So every time you do this, every time you step out into this arena, you have an opportunity to get a little bit better than what you were before. And if you are a podcaster, if you are a content creator and you're not reviewing your content from the perspective of your listener, of your audience, of your viewer, then you're not giving yourself every opportunity to improve. I will listen to my own show from the perspective of a listener to understand how that experience comes across and to recognize any defects or problems with it. And one of the things I noticed from last week's episode, a couple things. One is the news sounder, which you're going to hear in a few minutes, was super loud and it was drowning out my voice. So I'm making sure to do it, making sure to get the audio mix right and balanced for you. And hopefully we've fixed the issue this time. Going to make some changes to the mix, to the EQ on my voice. I noticed a lot of high-pitched, like lip noises, which were really weird, and just that kind of thing drives me nuts. So I'm sorry for that. And the last thing I wanted to correct is I played a clip from Scott Sigler that was actually from an interview that I did with him back in 2009. And I know I said that, but in the process of editing my own show, somehow I deleted a portion. So where it sounded like I was saying that this is something that Scott Sigler said when he was on his live stream with Evo Terra. That's not the case. That was from 2009. When I interviewed him way back then, talking about what makes you so successful at this. And it was about consistency. So I just wanted to clear that up in case there was any confusion. And I wanted to ask real quick, has anyone else noticed that Apple's design is getting worse? I was looking at some of the images from the upcoming iOS 26, now they're calling it. And Steve Jobs, when he was in charge of Apple, Apple's design was clean and lean and kind of minimalist, and it didn't overdo it. And I've seen some of these pictures of what you can make your iPhone look like, your screen look like with all the apps and everything. And it's just so much noise, so much visual clutter. And not for the first time, I feel like Apple has really lost the plot. They've lost what made them unique. After Steve Jobs died, they stopped taking risks, and now they're trying to do too much. So that's just my feeling. Leave a comment on the YouTube video for this episode, or you can email indianajimpodcasts@gmail.com. That is podcasts as in plural or as in active verb. So indianajimpodcasts@gmail.com. You can send that email to me and give me your thoughts. Of course, there are multiple ways to give feedback on the show. Of course, there's reviews in, I was going to say in iTunes. On Apple Podcasts, I don't know if Spotify has a review feature. If they do, please use that. If you subscribe to the podcast through Substack, where it's hosted, you can, of course, leave a comment on the post for this episode. If you have audio feedback, you can, of course, record yourself and email that to indianajimpodcasts@gmail.com. It's time for news. News. Yes, that portion of the program where we delve into headlines from the arts and entertainment, from television, movies, music, video games, and the world of publishing. How much do you enjoy having microtransactions in your video games? And how much do you appreciate having Visa and MasterCard available to process those payments? So this comes to us from Bellular News over on YouTube. And apparently the developers behind Runescape, which is Jagex, a British developer, they have admitted that microtransactions have hurt their game. In fact, their social media manager via Reddit spoke about this, and the quote is, "We will see reduced revenue from microtransactions, and we have total support to take that hit." As Maud North said, who's another representative of the company, "The future of RuneScape 3's success should be based on the size, scale, and satisfaction of the players in our game." And one of the things that contributed to this was a survey they ran amongst their customers, which says that 42% of current players say that microtransactions currently detract from their experience. 86% of microtransactions purchasers are unhappy with the mechanics of what's called the treasure hunter, which is a randomized reward system. Think loot boxes or Electronic Arts surprise mechanics, right? 60% of former players felt that the microtransactions detracted from their experience, and 63% of ex-players were likely to return if they addressed key concerns with XP-related microtransactions. When you hear XP-related, think pay to win, because the XP, or experience points for the uninitiated, your XP determines how fast you level, how much power or whatever that you get out of your character. And so the company's financial data, which was publicly available and analyzed by Bellular News, pointed out that between the years 23 and 24, the overall revenue for microtransactions decreased by 5.4 million pounds. And overall, their company experienced a loss of about 1.5 million pounds, given the many different revenue streams they had. Their subscription revenue went up, but their microtransaction revenue went way down. And this is the conclusion that Mr. Bellular, I forget his name, but he said, if you start doing loads of microtransactions that are highly targeting a small part of your player base, then in order to make that number go up, you will do more things to sell to those players. The financial returns then from your game are from a smaller cluster of your base. So your business model starts catering toward getting money out of the smallest group of consumers rather than the player base as a whole. And I'll include the link to this video in the show notes so that you can go watch this yourself. But I've talked about this before on my 40 Plus Gamer channel, on my Star Wars Survival Guide channel, and now here. When I was playing Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, the mobile game mechanics are so geared towards catering to the whales, and pay to win is the best way to cater to the whales.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gungans and Jots, holster them blasters and put your hands together because it's time for Whale or Fail with your host, the Grand Admiral, director of the video.
If you want to compete in the PvP portion of the game, which is the Grand Arena, you have to have a squad of players or a squad of characters that is up to snuff. The only way to get up to snuff is upgrade that character's gear. The only way to upgrade that gear is through the process of purchasing, trading, crafting gear. The best way to get high quality gear is to pay that money, is to buy those crystals and use those crystals to buy better gear, which of course often is randomized. So this is what happened to Battlefront 2. This is why players revolted against Battlefront 2 so hard at the launch was because EA thought that they could take the same mechanics that they applied to Galaxy of Heroes and apply that to Battlefront 2. They thought, hey, this game, Galaxy of Heroes, makes us millions of dollars, billions actually, and because of these whales that spend so much money on these things, and they're the people that they naturally cater to because the whales support the development of the game. And so they thought, hey, we can do the same thing in Battlefront 2, and players will buy this from us. They will buy crystals. Again, same currency. They didn't even hide it. They didn't even change the name of the currency. It was still crystals that you could buy to increase your chances of getting better gear. And they severely throttled progression from the beta. It was like you might call it a beta and switch, okay? Instead of bait and switch, it's a beta and switch, where you give a certain impression through your beta about how progression is going to work, and then you pull that back. And so in order to get the better gear quicker, to be more competitive, you're going to want to pay more money to get that stuff. And players, AAA players, are not mobile players. They're not the same people. They're not the same, wealthy person on the subway spending their time and their hard-earned currency to have a bit of enjoyment on the tube, right? So that didn't work. And it's why a lot of people have left Galaxy of Heroes. It's why their player base has fallen off severely. And it's one of the things that the RuneScape developers have realized. It's the one thing that Destiny players have realized. It's what Apex Legends players have realized. Is that there's so many microtransactions now. Everything is diluted. And look at Call of Duty. You've got Beavis and Butthead in Call of Duty, for Pete's sake.
They just lack so much creativity, huh? If purchase premium track. No, I'm good.
Who wants to play that? Except some kid who thinks Beavis and Butthead are funny or cool or whatever. It's like the stupid banana suit in Fortnite. Like, I don't want to get in there and have a shoot 'em up with a giant cartoon banana. I just don't. And the cartoonifying of the gaming landscape, it's showing that they're no longer trying to appeal to my generation. They're trying to appeal to kids. And video games should be for kids, but there should also be an option for adults who enjoy playing video games and don't want to see all that stuff because it just looks so out of place, and it just kind of steals some of the enjoyment out of what should be an immersive video gaming experience. So, love to hear your thoughts on that. But now we'll get to something a little more serious that has a little bit worse implications for society as a whole. Now, if you're, let's say, an American, you ought to believe in the Bill of Rights. You ought to believe in the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is the only way that we can restrict the government from trampling our rights. That's the whole point of the Bill of Rights. That's the whole point of the American Revolution to begin with. This is one of the common Western values that we should all hold dear. Regardless of what your party is, you should believe in your own freedom to say what you want, to think what you want, freedom to associate, freedom to pursue your happiness under the bounds of the law. And our lawmakers exist to do the will of the people. We vote them into office. If they make laws we don't like, there's a process for dealing with that. So now we have a special interest group, Collective Shout, I believe is what it's called, and based out of Australia, of all places. They put pressure on Visa and MasterCard to put pressure then on companies like Valve, Steam, and itch.io, I believe, to disallow NSFW, not safe for work, adult games based on their Visa's corporate values. And so Visa came out the end of last year, and they refused to process payments to a site that was selling manga in Japan because some of the content of the manga was pornographic or deviant behavior, let's say. The I word and the R word and those things that YouTube doesn't like, so I'm not going to say. But these kind of things were in this content. And this isn't about whether you think that stuff's appropriate, because I don't. It's disgusting. It's despicable. And the people that consume that somehow enjoy that or get off on that are sick people. But you're allowed to be a sick person in this world. What matters is what you do to other people and whether that content you consume causes you to do something to someone else. That's between you and your conscience. Steam recently delisted a bunch of games that were sexually explicit, had kind of these assault type mechanics in the game, let's say. The content that they sold up until this point was legal to sell. It's not up to Visa or MasterCard how you spend your money or what you spend your money on. They exist in what's called a common carrier function. It's like the power company. The power company doesn't get to come in and tell you, you can't use your TV for that. You can't store that in your refrigerator. You know, you can't buy that brand of air conditioner. You need this brand. Now, there are air conditioners that have safety things or, appliances that have to follow certain guidelines, and we get that. That's according to the law. That's not according to what the power company thinks you ought to do. The water company doesn't get to come in and tell you you can't put that in your water that you drink, right? It's this common carrier concept. The phone company doesn't get to tell you what you could talk about. So Visa and MasterCard, their job is to move money between banks. They shouldn't get to tell you what you get to do with your own money within the law. There's a difference between what we call policy advocacy and censorship. You can advocate to your government officials for whatever policy you think is appropriate. And you can convince your fellow citizens that, yes, you should vote for this. What you don't get to do is pressure a company to put pressure on another company to stop people from doing something you personally don't like. There are a lot of implications to this because, of course, it starts with things that we all mutually find disgusting and reprehensible. And left or right, Republican, Democrat, whatever your party affiliation, we ought to be able to agree on that. And if you don't think that stuff is disgusting, I don't want to know you. But we all have the freedom of our own conscience to consume the content that we want to consume. If you want to subscribe to a magazine like Playboy, let's say, that's your right to do. And it's not up to Visa or MasterCard or your bank to tell you you can't. By the same token, you might think abortion is health care. And you might think that women ought to have free access to abortion. Okay? And it's your right to believe that. You might believe that abortion is murder and that no one should be able to have access to that. You are free to believe that. And you are free to advocate to the government for your position and to advocate before your fellow citizens to vote for the people that support your point of view. That is your right to do. I don't believe that Visa or MasterCard should be in a position to tell you you can't use your own money to get that abortion. I don't believe that Visa or MasterCard should be able to tell you you can't use that money to donate to your pro-life cause. Can we all agree on that? I feel like we can. It's not up to us to tell somebody that you can't use your money, because how we spend our money is expression. It is speech. It is how we express ourselves. So it's like when the Canadian truckers were clogging up downtown and they were protesting the fact that they were being forced to do something against their will, to inject themselves with a substance that they didn't trust. Regardless of your opinion about the vaccine or not, or whatever it is, the fact that the Canadian government debanked these people. In other words, you have no access to your hard-earned money to spend how you like, because we don't like what you're doing. Now, there are recourses under the law, and Canadian law is different than American law, but it's a violation of personal freedom. Now, if you want to take a tow truck and tow that truck out of there, well, great, do that. Or, here's the thought, you listen to your citizens and you allow them freedom. What a novel concept. If the side you oppose is in power, do you want them to be able to use their power to do this to you? It's like the president and the idea of classifying ICE protesters as terrorists. And I think there's some nuance there, because I believe what he wanted to do was take the people providing the money for the ICE protesters to declare them terrorists so that they could freeze their money. And this is a dangerous road, because if you're assaulting an officer, there's legal recourse for that. There is arrest and trial. There are fines. There are things that you do when a police officer is being assaulted. Protesting, that's one thing. Obstructing traffic, again, there are legal recourses to that. It's not up to Visa or MasterCard to tell Steam what they're allowed to sell on their own platform. I think it's wrong. I think it sets a bad precedent, and I think it sets a bad precedent for every side of any political argument that you might think of. Any moral argument, social argument, whatever that is, whatever that debate is, it shouldn't come down to, well, we're going to make sure these people can't spend their money because we disagree with what they're doing. We disagree with what they're spending it on. I think that's just wrong. So you can watch Hogue Law, Rick Hogue. He does a great analysis of all of this, complete with links and evidence and documents and everything else that you can imagine. And I will post a link to Hogue Law's video you can watch in your own time. Now, that brings us to the end of the news and into our primary topic, which is Time's 100 best podcasts of all time. And you should know, I probably have things to say about that. So there's this list of 100 podcasts, and there are problems with this list. Big problems, because if you're going to look at the best of all time, let's say you're going to look at the best basketball player of all time, you're not just going to stop at LeBron, okay? You're not just going to say LeBron James is the best basketball player of all time and there's no comparison to anybody else. Now, you might if you have zero historical perspective. But no, you're going to look back at other players. You're going to look back at Hakeem Olajuwon. You're going to look back at Michael Jordan, which arguably, in my mind, inarguably, is the greatest basketball player who ever lived. You're going to look at Kobe Bryant. You're going to look at Bill Russell, who won 11 championships with the Boston Celtics in a different era. You're going to look at the guys who set the standard, the historical standard for what being great is and what it means. So in the case of the best podcasts of all time, there has to be something that goes back to the beginning of that time. When podcasting started in 2004, you've got 21 years worth of podcasts to consider. And wouldn't you think that one of the greatest podcasts of all time would be one that started in 2004 and set the standard for everything else that was to come? We consider George Washington one of the greatest, if not the greatest president that we ever had in the history of the country. When was he president? He was the first one. So it's hard to go back and say, well, what was the first podcast ever made? But let's consider some of the ones that they excluded from the list. Joe Rogan is not on the list of the 100 best podcasts of all time, even though he's currently the most listened to podcast anywhere. He's not on the list. Now, it doesn't matter what you think of as the best, because best is subjective. But best, if you want to make it objective, has to take into account how many listeners, right? We can look at the best TV shows of all time, but that better include some shows that were the highest rated shows of their time. So you would have to consider something like Dallas, who had the best ratings of any show with the episode where JR got shot. Spoiler alert for Dallas. You have to consider the shows that have the vast number of listeners. And Joe Rogan is at the top of that. What about All Things Considered from NPR? That's not even on the list. That was one of the earliest podcasts that ever came out. NPR was one of the early adopters in the radio space. And All Things Considered is one of the longest running podcasts in history. And that's not on your list? Stuff You Should Know is not on the list? Lore? Lore was one of the most popular podcasts not that long ago. What about TED Talks? TED Talks have been available in podcast form since 2005, and they're not on the list. I'd argue TED Talks is one of the most popular and influential formats for public address, public speaking, or even content creation that there is. So I don't know how that's not on the list. So there is a link that I'm going to post in the show notes. It's how we chose the 100 best podcasts of all time. So I looked in here for a methodology. What criteria did you consider when you chose the 100 best podcasts of all time? Reviewing the nearly decade's worth of best of lists I've compiled since I started on the podcast beat, so one person, laid bare just how much the medium has changed. Oh, historical perspective, right? Once upon a time, you didn't have to be an A-lister with a professional studio setup to find overnight fame. So I'm thinking, oh, good. So we're going to talk about Adam Curry, right? The podfather himself, maybe. We're going to talk about Chris Pirillo, right, who was there in 2004. We're going to talk about Scott Sigler, who's been producing audio fiction since 2005. Or Mur Lafferty, or Dave Jackson's School of Podcasting was started in 2005. Maybe we're going to talk about Father Roderick, or Grammar Girl, Mignon Fogarty, right? We're going to talk about some of these people. No. The likes of Roman Mars, Mike Duncan, Sarah Marshall, and Michael Hobbs, Hrishikesh Hirway, and Phoebe Judge all became famous names in the podcast space without the boost of a Hollywood career. Who are these people? I've never heard of these people. They became famous names in the podcast space. What is your podcast space? Between the mid-2000s and the mid-2010s, okay, mid-2000s, 2005, right? All you needed was a microphone and a dream of cutting an ad deal with MailChimp. Now, that is extremely cynical. We didn't dream about cutting an ad deal with MailChimp. When we got into podcasting back in its infancy, we weren't even thinking about sponsors at all. So that's just a dumb statement from somebody who doesn't understand what they're doing. That low barrier to entry eventually led to a podcasting boom in the late 2010s that accelerated when so many of us were stuck at home during COVID-19 lockdown. So your frame of reference is late 2010s and then COVID, 2020. Just a complete lack of historical perspective whatsoever. So then they talk about how many people are watching podcasts on YouTube, and New York Times pushing their writers and podcasters to put their faces on camera. Okay. With the change in medium has come a shift in focus. Major podcast producers have largely abandoned in-depth investigative reporting and quirky comedic voices in favor of buzzy names. Yada, yada, yada. Former retired athletes, former royals, and first ladies. But not every famous person is good at podcasting. Much of collating this list when it came to this particular breed of pod, I hate that word, involved sorting out who can conduct an insightful interview or piece together a compelling monologue from who is just a big name. Okay, so we looked at the execution more than just the name attached, all right? That said, we at time talk a lot about influence, and that list of influential people includes podcasters. Serial, Two Dope Queens, Mark Maron, Serial. Let's see, Mark Maron interviewing President Obama. Okay, so I see a few examples, but what's your methodology for choosing? So I included some shows that have ended their runs. I tried to pick, again, one person. I tried to pick podcasts that, if not entirely evergreen, have a hefty archive that can be revisited. Series that crack jokes that haven't gotten old, or covered books and movies you can still read and watch before tuning into a specific episode that will help you appreciate them more fully. I'm sorry, who was reviewing books and interviewing authors back as early as 2005? That's right, The Dragon Page, Michael R. Menengue, and Evo Terra. Which you could, if the backlog was still available, and this is a problem, go back and listen to those interviews. But I digress. With this list, I endeavored to find the best of the best, a database you can sort through by genre. Much ink has been spilled over the years about the parasocial relationships we form with podcast hosts, and yes, while it's wise not to get too attached to a stranger, I certainly think of my favorite hosts as imagined buddies that I get to visit with each week. So in other words, there actually is no methodology to choosing the 100 best podcasts of all time. Well, I do have a methodology. And that methodology comes with experience, because unlike this Eliana Doctorman, okay, she's a mom. I'm looking at her Instagram. Probably a millennial, not a Gen Xer. If I had to guess, she's probably late 20s, early 30s. That's my guess. Obviously, her frame of reference is not going to be the same. Her frame of experience is not going to be the same as someone who is listening to them, to podcasts as they came out. Who were the early adopters? Obviously, it's not like we're World War II veterans and we're dying here. People who were adults when podcasts came out? Wouldn't you want a panel with some generational span to see to see what was popular back in the day that we remember fondly? So I went back and I went to archive.org, and I went back to the very first time that podcastalley.com was snapshotted, or whatever the word is. And it was 2004. It was April of 2004. there were 372 podcasts available. There are now something like 450,000 active podcasts. But back then, under 400. That's still a lot for being at its infancy. Do you know there are still people that are still podcasting that have been doing it for 21 years now? Geek News Central, that's Rob Cochran over at Blueberry. Still doing Geek News Central 21 years later. Dan Klass, or Kloss, I don't know how you say that, The Bitterest Pill, has been going since 2004. Coverville, a podcast highlighting cover songs, that has been going since 2004. The Engadget podcast, The Linux Link. Chris Pirillo is still out there making content, though he's more of a streamer now than a podcaster. The Evil Genius Chronicles are still going. And these are people that have been inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame. You might think, well, if we want to pick the best podcasts of all time, we should probably go back and look and see who's in the Hall of Fame, who's recognized in the industry as being one of the best podcasters of all time. You might go back to that, or not if you're time. Or I should say, if you're Eliana Doctorman of Time Magazine. You might think reporters would be better at research. I thought. What about 2005? Scott Sigler podcasts his novel Earthcore, and he's still podcasting his fiction for free every week, every Sunday, without fail. Scott Sigler is still there doing it. Mer Lafferty, I Should Be Writing. She started with Geek Fu Action Grip. She's been podcasting since 2005. Dave Jackson, The School of Podcasting. How many people have learned to do a podcast because of Dave Jackson or because of Cliff Ravenscraft, who was the podcast answer man? What about Father Roderick, starting with the Daily Breakfast, and he's still doing his podcasting. It's a different title now, but Father Roderick is still out there. The Muggle Cast, Harry Potter, still going since 2006. Mysterious Universe, Grammar Girl, been going since 2006. 2007, George Hrab, H-R-A-B, who was a 2025 Podcast Hall of Fame inductee, is still podcasting 18 years later. These people are still going. These people have amassed large followings, and they're still going. Many of them going strong. Mer Lafferty leveraged her platform into an opportunity to write the novelization for a Star Wars movie. She wrote the novelization for Solo. So, Grammar Girl leveraged her platform into multiple appearances on other podcasts, TV shows, talk shows, that kind of thing. So, what about notable early adopters? How can you look back, if you do look back, how do you exclude Adam Curry? Only one person is known as the Podfather, and it's Adam Curry, one of the earliest podcasters, one of the people who developed RSS for podcasting, one of the guys at the beginning of things. The Daily Source Code was the biggest podcast at the time, and now he's doing podcasting 2.0. He's doing other shows. The Daily Source Code is no longer active, but he is. Adam Curry still is. What about the Dawn and Drew Show? Now, some of you kids may be like, what? Never heard of them. That's because they're not still doing it, but they were one of the earliest and biggest podcasts back in the early mid-2000s. What about one of the oldest Star Wars podcasts was Star Wars Action News, which is all about collecting action figures. They started in 2006. Now, they stopped in, I think, 2019, but they had a really good long run. They were one of the earliest and best Star Wars podcasts out there. Heck, if you go back to early podcasts, you could talk about Chrono Radio, which was Nathan P. Butler, who was the guy that created the first Star Wars timeline, the Star Wars Timeline Gold. And he was doing Chrono Radio, I think, as far back as 2003, before RSS became a thing. He was doing a show, which was, you basically call a podcast. Back then we called it internet radio. But what about this one? One of the biggest podcasts of all time, one of the most listened to podcasts still, the third most listened to radio talk show program in America, The Dave Ramsey Show, was one of the earliest adopters of podcasting as far back as 2005. For 20 years, Dave Ramsey has been on a podcast and still going. How can you not include The Dave Ramsey Show on the list of 100 best podcasts of all time? All of these things that we can look back and say, there's been a lot of podcasts. And you're going to cover the 100 best of all time. You have 30 for 30, which is ESPN. You have Wondery has a bunch of podcasts in here. A Spotify podcast. Good Hang with Amy Poehler hasn't even been live for a year, has it? Travis and Jason Kelsey are one of the best podcasts of all time? Like, do you see what I mean about no historical perspective? Pushkin again, New York Times again, Spotify again. Well, it's no wonder they're so popular, because they can push these episodes and shows out to their largest subscriber base in the world. That helps. The only one I listen to that's on this list of 100 best podcasts is The Town with Matthew Bellany. A lot of these are all network shows. These are people with corporate backers, with a budget, who have this money and this clout. They can automatically attract these big guests. They have production staff. We've been doing this for 20 years without the help of a large network, without financial backing from Hollywood or from Spotify or from a big New York newspaper. So why did I want to talk about this? Why did I bring this up? Well, A, because it's in the news. B, because I've been podcasting a long time, off and on. I've definitely not been consistent, as I've pointed out in previous episodes, but I've been doing this a long time. I've been following it a long time. I've been paying attention and listening a long time. And this all kind of comes back to why I decided to bring it back. When you're doing a podcast, when you're creating videos on YouTube, whatever your content is, whatever you're writing, you need to be true to your brand. You need to be true to who you are. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of these podcasts are honestly to sell advertising. They sell advertising just like it's terrestrial radio. And they don't think that, hey, our listeners might fast forward through all these ads, which is typically what I do. So are you being true to your brand? Or are you being true to the New York Times brand? Or are you being true to the Ringer's brand? Or are you being true to Gimlet's brand? One of the YouTubers I watch, a YouTuber who's not a YouTuber, is Sungrand Studios. His name is Gerald. And he had a video recently about being true to your brand. And one of the things he said was that if you accept ad offers, that means you need to get as many people watching your videos as possible, which makes you a slave to the algorithm. You let it push you and you become a cog in the machine. That's one of the things that when I started this again and got this YouTube channel going for this purpose of doing this podcast, was that I'm not going to be a slave to the algorithm. I'm not looking to leverage YouTube. This is just a platform for communication. What I want to do is I want to write, and I want to publish books, and I want to tell stories, and I like to talk to people, and I like to talk a lot. And if you want to be a YouTuber, you want to be successful on YouTube, well, you got to get your thumbnail game going. You got to get your title game down. You got to know how to make those titles. You got to be consistent. You got to look at Google Trends. You got to see what people are searching for, because the best vehicle for leveraging YouTube is search. If your video, your titles, and your content is not searchable, people won't find you. So you have to worry about those things. You have to worry about things that are not really related to what you're doing or what you want to do. Maybe you really do want to show people how to repair everything on a 2004 Hyundai Sonata. Maybe that's your bag. Maybe that's your thing. Maybe you, let's see, what's another very specific niche? Maybe you just have a specific niche that you love with all your heart. You can't imagine talking about anything else. Maybe you run a cooking YouTube and you just love showing new recipes and showing people how to cook, and you are laser focused on that one thing. Well, good for you. So the algorithm is a machine. And the more you cater what you do to that machine, the more you become a cog in that machine. And this is something interesting that Mike Rowe, when he appeared on Theo Vaughn's podcast, and I don't listen to Theo Vaughn much, but when he has someone interesting that I like, I'll listen to it because it's an interesting conversation. And Mike Rowe, of course, is the dirty jobs guy. And they get to a point where they're talking about globalization. And he says, we're in this space where everything is designed to please the consumer. Walking into Walmart and buying everything you need at an affordable price is made possible because the stuff isn't made here. And Theo observes that, that person in China is making a sweater for someone across the world that they're never going to meet and don't care about. So what does that mean for us? We want to buy cheap things. We want to pay less money for the things that we use. Well, that means it needs to be available cheaply. And the best way for it to be available cheaply is for the labor to be cheap. Mike Rowe jumps off that and says, if you spend your life making widgets for people you never meet, then you will never be connected to anything other than the transactional, brute realities of your job. How many of us look at the job we do and go, it's just a job. It's just something I do to get money so that I can put food on the table. In my job, we're a central fill for a chain pharmacy. I'm concerned about the person down the line. What can I do in my job that makes their life easier? It's how you put a label on a vial that the machine does a lot of. How we put labels on boxes. How do we put the label in a position where someone who gets the box doesn't need to rip off the label to read what's on the box? Things like that. Being aware of the next person down the line. And so I think that speaks a lot to what we do as content creators. Quote I really liked from a YouTube channel called Untrenditional Gospel. So untraditional, but it's trenditional. He said, if you create with yourself in mind, then you're still creating with a heart of consumption. You're creating with the intent to receive. And that temptation is very present for people who make content, for people who write books and want to sell books. Yes, we want to sell them. And oftentimes we'll say, well, we write what we want to read. But in that sense, we're also writing for the reader. We're aware, or we ought to be aware, of storycraft, how that story will resonate with a reader to lead them to want more. Now, of course, you might say, well, yeah, I'm doing that with a heart of consumption because I'm doing it so that I can sell more books. But you're doing it in order that people might enjoy your books and want to buy more books. And with YouTube, you're creating videos in such a way that for retention, right? You want to get that retention and attention. And the more you deliver what the audience wants to watch, the more they're going to watch your videos. And that's why a lot of people are fond of saying, well, I'm not serving the algorithm, I'm serving the audience. And by serving the audience, the algorithm does the job for me. And in a sense, that's true. YouTube, in order to automate the process of content delivery, wants to design the algorithm to serve the audience. So there is a sense that we want to serve what our audience wants to watch. We're trying to automate that process so we don't have to curate it. And so ask yourself this question. This was something that Dave Ramsey said when he was on Theo Vaughn's podcast. Not to bring it back to Dave Ramsey, but here we are. And the question was, well, how should a person who wants a promotion or a raise, how should they come to their boss? How should they approach their boss? And the idea that he got down to was asking yourself a question. How can I add more value than I cost? When we want to appeal to an audience, so much of leveraging YouTube is providing value for people. We want to be a value add so people will listen to our show, watch our YouTube videos. And it's, what do I have to do to be worth more? And that really resonated with me as a writer. Resonated with me as a writer. What do I have to do as a writer to be worth more? What do I have to do to sell more books? What do I have to do to increase my influence? One of the things I have to do is produce. One of the things I have to do to be worth more is to be here week in and week out consistently. So one of the things I have to do to be worth more as a writer is to write. I have to write, and I have to finish things, and I have to not give myself over to distractions like video games constantly, and move the needle. That's been my mantra of late, is how do I move the needle? Every day when I sit down at this computer, how do I move that needle? How do I push the ball down the field? How do I drive the car down the road? How do I achieve forward momentum? And that leads me to ignore the things that detract from that momentum. So that's what I want to leave you with, is what can you do to be worth more? Drop down in the comments. Let me know. Give me feedback on this show. Let me know what you have to do to be worth more. Let me know what I have to do as a podcaster to be worth more to you. And any other comments, like your favorite podcast to listen to? When did you start listening to podcasts? How long have you been a listener? Or if you're a podcaster or a content creator, how long have you been doing it? If you drop down in the comments, leave some value for others. What's that one tip that's helped you to do what you do? Again, you can email indianagympodcasts@gmail.com. That's podcasts plural. indianagympodcasts@gmail.com. You can, of course, leave a comment down below or wherever you listen to this show, and I will get back with you next Sunday.